Okay, so picture this. You're just getting back from like a total digital detox vacation rate. No internet, no news, nothing. And you pick up your phone, ready to catch up on everything you missed, and bam, election results.
I bet that was a shock, huh?
Total shocker. Donald Trump is the 47th president of the United States.
Yeah, it's a pretty major political event. Not just a typical election, you know?
Right.
We're talking second non-consecutive term, oldest president-elect ever. Oh, and first to win with a felony conviction. Not to mention being impeached twice.
Seriously, this is uncharted territory.
Uncharted is right.
All right, so to break this all down, we're going deep into these live updates and analyses that AP News put out, all from yesterday, November 6th. They have this amazing network of reporters across all 50 states giving us the information as it happens.
It's impressive, the reach they have.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that really caught my eye right off the bat was Michigan.
Yeah, Michigan was a nail-biter back in 2016, wasn't it?
Oh, totally. And it seems Trump managed to snag it again.
It really was a key state for him. AP is highlighting how he really upped his game in Detroit, which seems like it was a big factor in winning the whole state.
It shows you how targeted his campaign was, how he really honed in on specific demographics and their concerns.
For sure, it was a very calculated approach.
So while Trump is celebrating his victory down in Florida, Vice President Kamala Harris is getting ready to concede later today at Howard University. You know, her alma mater.
That's got to be a tough one.
I can't even imagine. But anyway, we know that she's already spoken with Trump to congratulate him, really emphasizing the peaceful transfer of power.
Well, that's good to hear, at least.
Yeah. But it's hard not to think about what happened on January 6th, 2021, especially with those inauguration preparations already underway in D.C.
Oh, yeah. I can't even imagine what it must be like for those construction workers building those very platforms that were stormed just a few years ago.
The powerful image, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It makes you realize how fragile things really are, how important it is to uphold those democratic norms.
You know, no matter what side you're on.
Exactly.
And speaking of sides, the world is reacting to this news in a huge way. We're seeing cautious optimism, outright concern. It's really the whole spectrum of emotions.
I can't say I'm surprised.
Me neither. Some world leaders seem pretty eager to collaborate, while others are definitely feeling some apprehension.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at Egypt's President El-Sisi. He seems pretty positive about the whole thing, willing to work with Trump and all that.
Yeah. But then you have, like, that Norwegian environmental group that's really worried about what this means for the U.S.'s leadership on climate change.
Right, because Trump's stance on that has always been, well, let's just say it hasn't exactly been in line with those groups.
For sure. And that just highlights how this election has global implications, reaching far beyond our borders. We're talking environmental policy, international relations, the whole 9 yards.
Everything's connected, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just about policy either. The King of Morocco actually called Trump's win a tribute to patriotism.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have Slovakia's prime minister.
Who, let's be honest, has been known to lean a bit pro-Russian.
Yeah. Well, he sees this as a big blow to liberal ideas. It's so interesting how this one event can be interpreted in so many ways, depending on who you ask.
Well, each nation is coming at this with its own political and social baggage.
That's for sure. So we've got global shockwaves, a historic win, and a nation on the brink of a very unique transfer of power.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But remember, this election wasn't just about the presidency. There were some really significant domestic issues at play as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest ones was abortion rights.
Right. The results there were kind of a mixed bag, weren't they?
Yeah, it really reflected how divided the country is on the issue.
So Nebraska, Florida, South Dakota, they all went ahead and upheld those restrictions on abortion.
But then you have Montana, Colorado, Nevada, Maryland, New York. They all went in the opposite direction. Solidified access.
Yeah, and New York even expanded protections on reproductive health care and autonomy.
A real range of responses there.
And then there's Missouri, which is fascinating.
What happened there?
Voters actually overturned a strict abortion ban.
Huh, that's interesting.
It's almost like the tide is starting to turn in some places, even in states that are traditionally more conservative.
Maybe so.
And Arizona, too, they voted to expand abortion rights, even with that previous ban in place.
It's a complicated landscape, that's for sure. And it'll be interesting to see how all these different state decisions play out in the next few years, especially with the Supreme Court already weighing in on all this.
Exactly. And speaking of complex issues, we can't forget about the whole public health debate. particularly when it comes to vaccines.
Yeah, that's a hot-button issue for sure.
AP's VoteCast, which is their way of gathering in-depth voter data, found that 2 out of every 10 voters want the government to be less involved in childhood vaccinations.
That's a pretty significant number.
It is. And of those voters, a whopping 80% voted for Trump.
So what does that tell us?
Well, if you consider Trump's campaign promises, it raises some interesting questions.
Like what?
Well, he's talked about bringing in Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's been very vocal about his skepticism towards vaccines, to lead investigations into childhood diseases. He's really focused on things like obesity and autism.
That's bound to stir up some controversy.
I think. It makes you wonder how this is all going to impact vaccination policy in the U.S. going forward.
Yeah, that's definitely something we need to keep an eye on. The potential effects on public health could be pretty big.
Absolutely. So we've covered global reactions, domestic policy changes, and even touched on some of the emotional undercurrents running through all of this.
It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. But what about the economic impact?
Oh, well, one of the immediate things we saw was a surge in the U.S. stock market. Even Bitcoin jumped up.
Really?
Yeah. Seems like the markets are anticipating some big changes to economic policy.
Makes sense. We all know Trump's not afraid to shake things up, especially when it comes to the economy.
Oh, he loves to shake things up, period.
That's true. And he's already talked about tax cuts, deregulation, renegotiating trade deals.
And let's not forget about his interest in expanding presidential powers. That could have a pretty significant impact on the balance of power within the government.
Oh, definitely. And all of this is happening against a backdrop of increasing division in the country and a global landscape that's probably even more complex than it was 4 years ago.
It's like this weird mix of optimism and anxiety. The markets seem to be responding well, but there's this underlying tension. Everyone's wondering what Trump's return will mean for global stability. It's almost like the whole world is holding its breath, just waiting to see what his first move will be.
It is a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
It really is.
Okay, so that brings us to a really crucial question. With Trump back in the White House, what do you think will be his first big move? How will this impact the U.S.'s role in the world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like we're all watching this high-stakes chess match, and no one knows what the next move will be. Will he focus on domestic policies, the economy, healthcare, or will he take a more aggressive stance on foreign policy?
Maybe try to reassert that America First kind of approach.
Exactly. And how will this all be different from his first term? Will we see a more seasoned, perhaps even a little more restrained Trump? Or is he going to double down on the tactics that caused so much controversy before?
It's tough to say. Trump's always been a bit of a wild card.
Oh, absolutely. A master of disruption, you could say. He thrives on that chaos and unpredictability, which makes him so hard to predict.
And let's not forget the cultural and social implications here. His rhetoric has been incredibly divisive, and I don't see that just vanishing overnight.
No, definitely not. This win is likely to embolden some groups while sidelining others. It could even make those existing tensions in American society even worse.
It's important to remember the people who might be feeling vulnerable right now.
Yes, absolutely. It's easy to get swept up in all the political analysis and economic predictions, but we can't lose sight of the human impact of this election. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty out there.
It's true. This election really exposed some deep-seated divides within the U.S.
Wounds that need time to heal, for sure. Speaking of healing, I keep thinking about that peaceful transfer of power. It's good that Harris and Trump discussed that, but I can't help but wonder what's really going on behind the scenes.
What's happening in those backroom conversations? Right?
Exactly. Are they approaching this transition with a bit more caution because of what happened on January 6th?
Well, considering what happened, I'd hope so.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see how both sides are handling all this, especially with January 6th looming over everything. There's a level of, cautiousness, preparation that we haven't really seen before. It's like everyone learned a really harsh lesson about how fragile those democratic institutions are.
It's a serious wake-up call. It makes you wonder what can be done to protect American democracy from those kinds of threats in the future.
Big questions, for sure. And while we're thinking about the fragility of democracy, let's talk about the media for a second.
Okay, yeah. They've been front and center through this whole thing.
Right. Their role in shaping public perception, giving people accurate information and holding those in power accountable, it feels more crucial than ever.
Speaking of which, it's worth highlighting how AP actually called the elections for Trump.
Oh, yeah, they were on top of it.
They have this incredible network of reporters like we said, in all 50 states with all that local knowledge and those close relationships they've built with officials on the ground.
It really shows you the power of good old-fashioned reporting, especially in this age of social media and misinformation everywhere you look.
It's so easy to get lost in all the noise.
Exactly. These reporters can cut through all of that and give us reliable, verified information, and that's absolutely crucial for a democracy to function properly.
It's like having a trusted guide in a world that feels more chaotic and confusing by the day.
That's a great way to put it. They help us make sense of the information overload and figure out what's real and what's not.
Couldn't agree more. And that's exactly why it's so important to support quality journalism now more than ever.
Oh, 100%. In a world where truth is constantly being challenged, we need those reliable sources to guide us.
So, to recap, we've talked about the historical significance of Trump's win, the reactions from all over the globe, the shifts in domestic policy, even those emotional undercurrents that have been running through this whole event.
It's been quite a ride so far.
A real roller coaster. But this is just the beginning, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This is just the start of a new chapter in American history, one that's likely to be full of surprises, challenges, and opportunities.
And as we move forward into this uncharted territory, I think it's important to remember that we all have a part to play in shaping the future of our nation, whether that's engaging in thoughtful conversations, holding our leaders accountable, or just staying informed.
It's a whole new ballgame, that's for sure.
It really is. And I think one of the biggest questions on everyone's minds is, what does this all mean for everyday people? Like, how will Trump being back in office actually affect our lives?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And honestly, it's a tough one to answer. We can look at his proposed policies, what he's done in the past, but there's always that, that element of unpredictability with Trump.
He always keeps us guessing, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's try to break it down a bit, shall we? We talked about his economic plans, tax cuts, deregulation, all that. So who do you think really benefits from those kinds of policies? And who might get left behind?
Well, usually the argument is that these policies boost the economy, which should help everyone, right?
Right, in theory.
In theory, exactly. But in reality, well, it doesn't always work out that way. Those benefits don't always reach everyone equally. Tax cuts, for example, they tend to favor the wealthy. And deregulation, well, sometimes that can lead to companies doing things that actually harm consumers or the environment.
So it's not as simple as just saying tax cuts are good or deregulation is bad.
No, not at all. It's about understanding the nuances, the potential downsides, and who really ends up paying the price. And who reaps the rewards, of course.
Right, exactly. And that's where the government is supposed to step in.
Right. Well, that's the idea, at least.
To create a system that's fair, that protects the vulnerable,
Yeah.
and that makes sure growth is actually sustainable.
In a perfect world, right. But the thing is, how that role is actually defined, how it's implemented, that's going to be heavily influenced by the political climate. And as we've seen, things are pretty unstable right now.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's not just about the economy, is it? There are those social and cultural issues that we can't ignore. Like we said, the country's divided, especially on things like abortion rights and vaccines. How do you see those issues playing out under another Trump presidency?
Well, if I had to guess, I'd say those divisions are only going to get deeper. Trump's not exactly known for his subtlety, is he?
Definitely not.
And he's not afraid to take a hard line on this controversial issues, which is probably going to lead to even more fragmentation in American society, make it harder to find that common ground.
That's what worries me the most, I think. That lack of common ground, that inability to just have a civil conversation. It feels like we're losing our ability to listen to each other, to respect different viewpoints, to work together.
I get that. You need a certain level of trust for a democracy to work, right?
Right.
People need to be willing to engage in good faith, to be committed to finding solutions that actually benefit everyone. And that's not going to be easy in this climate.
It's a big challenge. So where do we go from here? What can we as individuals do to deal with all this uncertainty, all this, unsettling stuff that's happening in our political landscape?
Well, first things first, stay informed. Don't just rely on headlines or whatever's trending on social media.
Right. Do your own research.
Exactly. Look for credible sources, get different perspectives, find analysis that goes beyond the surface level. We need to understand the issues, the arguments, the potential consequences, all of it.
And that's where good journalism comes in.
Right. 100%. The kind of reporting AP has been doing, that factual, unbiased information, we need that to make sense of all this.
Absolutely. We need to support those institutions, engage with their reporting, hold them accountable.
Couldn't agree more. And don't be afraid to, question your own assumptions. Be willing to have those tough conversations, even when they're uncomfortable. Seek out viewpoints that challenge your own.
It's so easy to stay in our own little bubbles, surrounded by people who already agree with us, but that doesn't really help anyone, does it?
Nope. It just reinforces the divisions that are already there. We need to break out of those echo chambers, have those difficult dialogues, actually listen to each other with, with empathy, a genuine desire to understand. That's the only way we're going to bridge the gap and move forward.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it's important to remember that this is just the start.
The beginning of a new chapter.
Exactly. The next 4 years, who knows what they'll bring? There will be ups and downs, unexpected challenges, maybe even some pleasant surprises. But the main thing is to stay engaged, stay curious, and keep diving deep.
The future isn't set in stone, right? We create it together.
So true. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.